Hey everybody, so this is going to be the last of my polar domain shifting videos. Um, there's a series of them. This is going to be the sixth one. If you haven't already, you might want to check out the TE polar domain shifting video where I describe the idea of what the polar function is and what I mean by domain shifting in a little bit more detail there. That might give you a little bit more background, but it's okay to just start here too. So the quick, dirty explanation of domain shifting and polar function is every type is going to have what people refer to as the polar function or point of least resistance. You'll hear people talk about it as being sort of your blind spot. And that's going to be, whatever your type is, it's going to be your seventh, the function in your seventh slot. So if you're an INFJ, your third slot is introverted thinking, and so your seventh slot is going to be the opposite of your third slot. So that's extroverted thinking. So for an INFJ, extroverted thinking is going to be their polar function. And the polar function doesn't necessarily mean that, that you don't have that function if or you're incapable of using it. It's just that it takes a lot of attentional resources, right? And it's a function that's usually unconscious. And to bring it up and sort of use it in any sort of conscious, deliberative way, it takes a lot of attentional resources. Excuse me. And so because of that, I'd argue that when people are presented with a problem that's in the domain of their polar function, that they're going to try to shift it into using a different function to solve that problem. So for example, if you're TE polar and you're presented with a TE problem, rather than just sort of tackling the TE problem, your initial reaction will be, can I solve this using my FE function, my tool function, which is my second function in my stack? Can I use my FE as opposed to my TE to solve this problem? Now, again, it's not to say that, if it's a polar function, you just can't do it. Absolutely. It's just that it's a lot easier for you to process the information and come up with a solution if you're able to sort of shift it into a different domain. So for this video, I'm going to be talking about the two perception functions, the introverted perception functions, so SI, NI, introverted sensing, introverted intuition. And unlike some of the other videos, I'm going to sort of lump these two together and talk about them in the same one, because I think for these perception functions, it's just a little easier to talk about it that way. So we're going to be talking about the ESTJs, the ESFJs, who have polar NI, and then also the folks with polar SI are going to be the ENFJs and the ENTJs. So all your EJs, right? They're going to have one of these as a polar function. So I think the best way to sort of tackle it or describe it is a thought experiment that I used in a previous video, not one of these domain shifting videos, but another video where I talked about INFJs dealing with ESTJs or ESFJs and that sort of dynamic. So I'm going to use the same thought experiment, but instead of talking about INFJs, I'm going to talk about ENFJs and ENTJs. So hopefully it all makes sense. So imagine imagine there's this old-timey village, way back when in history, and they're having a drought. So it's not raining, the food's not growing, the animals that rely on the food are not eating, and they're dying off. And so now the people are faced with this sort of famine where they just don't have enough food to eat. And the people who sort of run the town are, have it's sort of they have this religion where, every year they sacrifice, virgins and pray and have some sort of ritualistic praying event, to ritual to their gods, right? And and if they appease their gods, then the gods will make it rain, and the food will grow, and the animals will live, and everybody will be, have enough food to eat and be happy. But this year something went wrong, right? They made all their sacrifices, they did all their rituals, but it's still not raining. And so now the town folk have to figure out, okay, how do we solve this problem? And if you're ESTJ or ESFJ and you're NI-POLR, if somebody came to you and said, hey, give us a new solution here, we got to do something, what we've been doing doesn't work here, so what are we supposed to do? If they're NI-POLR, they're not really going to come up with a new solution, right? They've a hard time sort of building up sort of a basic understanding, not a basic understanding, but like a representation of sort of the essence of whatever the issue is or what a solution might be. And because they have SI as their tool function, they're going to rely on tried and true rules, right? What have we always done? What are the rules, and different things that we've experienced told us in the past, right? And they're going to base their knowledge. So introverted sensing and introverted intuition are both sort of knowledge functions. Like, how do you use knowledge to come up with a solution to a problem? Their knowledge base is going to be purely SI. So all the rules, and so they're going to sort of protect the tradition. What have we been doing? And so their solution to the problem often is, well, we just have to sacrifice more virgins and we just have to pray harder. We just need to double down on what we've always done. And, obviously this year, whatever we were doing was not enough. So let's just do it, let's just work at it twice as hard, right? Because it's worked for us for as long as we can remember. And, there's no reason that it shouldn't work for us now, right? So let's double down. Let's sacrifice twice as many virgins. Let's have twice as many rituals. And eventually the gods are going to hear us and they'll make it rain and everything will be fine. So that's a very ESTJ, ESFJ sort of solution to the problem. The ENFJ and the ENTJ, their knowledge base is going to be built more off of their introverted intuition. And they're going to have a polar SI. And so they're going to be ignoring the traditional rules and the traditional way of doing things unless it makes NI sense, right? Like if they're able to look at it and say, oh yeah, okay, that makes NI sense, then they'll go along with it. But it's clearly not working. And so you'll have somebody so they'll come up with new ideas and they'll come up with explanations of what they think the problem is, right? Using that NI, right? I'm going to come up with what I like to call my own pet theory, right? My NI is going to take all the data, take all the information, observations that I'm getting. I'm going to synthesize it and I'm going to come up with an explanation of what's going on. And that's going to be my quote unquote knowledge or my knowledge base, right? And so depending on what they think the problem is, they might come up with different solutions. So for example, an ENTJ might just say, well, why don't we just, move 5 miles east and we'll be closer to the river and we'll get more rain. And that seems to be okay. So instead of doubling down and just doing what we've always done, why don't we just pick up and move, right? The ENFJ might come up with the same sort of solution, or they might say something like, well, we're just praying to the wrong gods, and just listen to me. I've got a better set of gods that we can pray to, and a better set of rituals, and a better set of sacrifices, and I've really thought this through. Just trust me. If we do this, then it'll all work out, right? Or they might come up with some other solution, like, maybe we should be trading with our neighbors. They seem to have enough food, and, we're pretty good at making banjos. And so maybe they need some banjos in exchange for food or something like that, right? But the point being is that they're going to sort of look at the problem, and they're going to, instead of trying to fix it using the old tried and true SI rules, they want to come up with their own explanation for what the problem is, and their own explanation of what a viable solution would be, right? Again, it's their little pet theory, right? And so you're going to see this dynamic between the ESTJs and ESFJs versus the ENFJs and the ENTJs. So the SI polars versus the NI polars. And the NI polars, the ESTJs, ESFJs, are going to, they're going to have this sort of blockade on the NI part of it. And they're just not going to see the argument. They're not going to see why things have to be different, right? Or why we're coming up with this totally different explanation or this different solution to the problem when we've been doing the same thing for thousands of years. So why would we do anything different? And not only that, but if we do pick up and move, they do have that extroverted intuition. So they're going to be able to think of all the possibilities and all the uncertainties of, if we pick up and move, there might be monsters, there might be rival tribes that are going to come in and attack us. There, it might be even worse. The rain might be even worse out there than it is here. Just all these things that they're not really arguing the merits of what the ENFJ and the ENTJ are arguing. They're just coming up with reasons not to do it, right? And so since there's all this uncertainty, surrounding the different way of doing it, why don't we just stick with the devil that we know and just double down on it, and we'll just put our heads down and work twice as hard, and eventually everything, doing what we always do, and eventually everything will work out. And of course, the ENFJs and the ENTJs, they just don't see it, right? Like once they've seen that the old way of doing it doesn't work and it doesn't compute in their NI map of the world, or their NI, sort of processing machine, right? Now that those old ways of doing things just don't work anymore, right? And that's just bad, faulty knowledge. That's bad, faulty information. And what everybody needs to do is follow my new information that I built up with my new solution that I've built up with my NI, truth generator, right? And so again, they're going to be arguing, we've got to do something different. It's clear whatever we've been doing clearly doesn't work. Yes, it's worked for hundreds of years, but things are different now, and we just have to adapt, and we have to think of, new solutions to the problem. And again, you'll just see the back and forth between the two the two sets of types. And I would argue, it's purely based off of what type of knowledge are they using to come up with a solution, right? And if the ENFJ and if the ENFJ and the ENTJ want to convince the NI polar types, the ESTJ and the ESFJ, they've got to make an argument that's going to satisfy the ESTJ, ESFJ, SI function, right? no matter how much the ENFJ says, trust me, I got this figured out, all you have to do is go with my new set of gods and we're going to be okay. The ESTJ, the ESFJs, they don't want to hear the words trust me, right? They don't trust people's just intuition on what they think the problem is or what's really going on, right? They trust their SI. And so if you want to convince them, you've got to show them that there's other people out there that have adopted your way of thinking, right? They adopted your solution. They either picked up and they moved over closer to the river, and now they're all doing great, and they saw an increase of 40% of their food stock and all that, and you can point to them, and now all of a sudden the ESTJs and the ESFJs have SI like data, right? Data that they can see and experience and incorporate into their knowledge bank. And now it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe we'll give it some thought, right? But they're not going to just listen to somebody's idea, right? No matter how well thought out that idea is, because they've got that NI polar where it just doesn't make sense to them. On the flip side, if the ESTJ and the ESFJs want to convince the SI polar types that, look, we can't do your crazy idea. Again, their natural inclination would be just, saying like, look at all the uncertainties that are involved. We don't want to deal with the uncertainties. And the ENTJ and the ENFJ are going to react and just say, oh, we'll deal with those when the time comes and you're overthinking it, we'll be fine. That's not going to, so that sort of interaction is not going to work. Really what the ESTJ, ESFJ want to do is try to convince or find some way to show the ENFJ and the ENTJ that the old ways of doing it actually do make sense. Like there is I don't want to just say rational reason behind it, but there's sort of this universal truth to doing it. And it's not just because it's always, it's the way we always did it, or that's the way tradition works, but it's to, have some sort of explanation that they can work into their NI factory that, explains why sacrificing these virgins and doing these rituals makes sense on an NI level, right? On a core universal truth level. Now that's going to be very hard for an ESTJ or an ESFJ to do, right? They might have to rely on other people to make that argument for them. But the point being, they can't just have this sort of battle of, trust me, my new way is totally going to work, and, just put faith in me and we'll be fine, versus, trust me, we've been doing this the same way for hundreds of years and there's no reason why it shouldn't be working now, so we're just going to keep doing it the same way. You're going to see that battle of, conflicting knowledge structures or knowledge bases where, both sides are going to reach an impasse and not be able to convince the other people that, that they're right and the other people are wrong. So to me, I think that's the best way of thinking of the SI NI blind spot polar function dichotomy. So when you're dealing, if you're any type and you're dealing with an ESTJ or an ESFJ, and you need to convince them that something is true, even though they've never experienced it, right? Even though nobody's ever told them this rule before, but you've sort of figured it out, there is going to be this sort of blind spot where they're just going to be like, huh? Like, where did you come up with this information? Now, of course, if you can point to other people saying it, then maybe they'll listen to you, because now it's not just your crazy idea. It's other people out there saying it too. And they'll just sort of incorporate that into their SI. And one example that just always sticks out to me is I had an ESFJ friend, and she was don't want to get into too many personal details here, but she had somebody who um, was sort of like every time she went to work, this person would send her a text and just be like, "Hey, how's work going?" Or if she went out and left the house, it'd be like, "Hey, when are you gonna get back?" These texts that sort of, if you read it, if you read into it, it's like the person knew where she was all the time, right? And so, so it sort of struck her as odd, like, hey, this person's always texting me when I'm at work, or this person's always texting me when I'm out at the store or whatever. And it just seems odd that they always sort of know when I'm not home, that kind of thing. And so my immediate reaction is like, well, did you put your, are they following you on your iPhone? Are you sharing your location? That kind of thing. And no, that wasn't it. She checked and it wasn't. And then it just kept getting worse, and it like kept, and to me it just became more and more obvious, because again, my introverted intuition is piecing all this together, and it became more and more obvious that somehow this person was tracking her, and knew her location somehow. And I'm just like, did they leave something in your car, like, that some sort of tracking device or something? And she even got to the point, she knew the person, and so, she got to the point where she was even able to see that they had like a tracking app on their computer or their phone, and just all this stuff, and like had, bought something on Amazon that was like some tracking device. And I'm just like, okay, well, this is clearly what's going on. But she still like would not believe it until, eventually she takes her car in and they find a tracker like on her car. And her car had been overheating and stuff like that. And that's why she took it in and they found it. And so, to me, it was just this good example of, and she is an ESFJ, like she didn't believe anything until she actually saw it, right? Until she actually experienced like seeing the tracker and being like, oh, wow, this really is true, right? Because everything else, like up until that point, is just like maybe, or maybe, we're just being paranoid, or maybe there's other explanations for it. Because she's sort of turning off the NI and turning on the NE, right? And thinking of all the other possible explanations for why this is the case. Where somebody with, dominant NI is just like the NI alarm is just going off and off and off, and just being like, look, it's clearly what's happening here. And so that's just an example of what I call sort of the NI block that ESTJs and ESFJs often have, where, it's almost obvious what's going on if you just sort of read between the lines, or sort of put all the data together. There's sort of one, obvious, I don't want to say logical, but one obvious solution or answer. But it's not until they actually get they actually see it, they actually experience it, that they're going to say, okay, now I agree. And and again, it's not like they completely dismiss what you're saying, but it's just sort of like they're not going to 100% accept it until they have proof, right? As opposed to, and maybe that's a good thing, right? I mean, maybe it keeps people from being overly paranoid and, jumping to conclusions right away. But at some point, it should become pretty obvious. Where the ENFJs and the ENTJs, it's not so much the opposite. I mean, they'll definitely come up with their conspiracy theories and their pet theories, and remain very wedded to them. And the only time that they're really going to incorporate the SI data or knowledge bank. It's as if it just sort of makes sense with their NI representations of things, their NI representation of the truth. And so they can run into problems where, people are just saying, like, look, I get it. You want to do this new crazy solution to an old problem, but, you know, I've seen other people do this. I've seen other businesses do this, or I've seen other towns do this. And whenever they do it, it's an absolute disaster and everything falls apart. And so let's, you know, let's put that aside for a second. Of course, the ENFJ and the ENTJ will think of reasons of why their solution is different from all the other solutions that people have tried before. And, again, just trust me. I'm an ENFJ. I totally know what I'm talking about. So let's just try it my way. And, so their problem, or the problem that they'll often run into is they're too wedded to that solution and are sort of ignoring, other data out there that sort of shows that, that solution might not be the best one. Or, they're not taking everything into account. So I think that's about it. So that's, a wrap up on the SI polar and the NI polar and really all of the polar functions across all the videos. So feel free to ask questions, make comments, make suggestions, and I will see you later. Thanks. Bye.